All right, welcome to chapter 2. Today we're going to get into a little bit more sophisticated functionality, but it's going to be pretty easy. But before we jump in, let's go through what we did last chapter just to get us up to speed. So in the last chapter, we went and built out the dashboard. That's the root skill view controller. It's the first view controller loaded whenever anybody's trying to visit or browse your skills front end. We dropped in a card, we dropped some pictures, some buttons. So let's take a look at that. I'm in the Spruce Spot Theater. I'm going to hit Command Shift N. That's going to bring up our jump to screen. Go 8. There it is, 8-bit stories. Enter. And then we have it. Our card with an image and some buttons. Now, real quick, I'm going to go ahead and remove that family icon, and I'm going to change the right button to right story. And then let's get into what we're going to get into for chapter 2. So I've got VS Code pulled up here, pretty much where we left off. I'm going to Command Shift K that line icon. I'm going to change the label from right to right story. I'm going to do one more thing. I was able to get the keyboard shortcuts the way I like them in this virtual machine I'm working in. So I'm going to hit Control Space and type watch.view. So that's just, again, the shortcut for the Spruce CLI. That's going to go to a waiting for changes. And once it does that, I know that it has been pushed. All the view changes have been pushed. So I'm going to jump back over here, Command R to refresh. And there it is. Family values, family members, feedback, right story. Or you could say right bedtime story. Again, we're not asserting anything as the values in any of these labels. So our tests don't fail when the label of a button changes. Okay, let's get into the good stuff. Chapter 2. Feedback. We're going to render a dialog for the feedback. So we're going to handle an on click for the button. That's going to force us to then render a dialog. Inside of that dialog, we're going to render a form. So we're going to get to play with forms. They're actually pretty easy. Then when you submit the form, we're going to emit an event called submit feedback. Then on the skill side, the backend side, we're going to create a listener for that's actually just going to send a message. Now, the concept of a message is somewhat of an abstraction in the platform. How a message is sent, because we're not too worried about specifically how it's sent, that will be handled by the person in their notification preferences. So by default, it'll send SMS, but if they have the native app, it could be push. And then as new delivery mechanisms are introduced, new ways to send messages will be available. But from us as a developer standpoint, we're not at all concerned with how the message is being delivered. We just want to actually send it. So we're going to render a dialog, a form. We're going to do some event creation and definitions. We're going to create a listener. Then we're going to emit the event. We're going to listen to it. And then in that listener, we're going to send a message. So we're going to emit a send message event. And then from there, we'll do some cleanup and some refactoring to make this thing tight. All right, well, let's get started. Okay, let's get on to the first failing test of the chapter. And this one, we're going to assert that clicking the feedback button actually just renders a dialog. Pretty simple place to start. So to do that, I'm going to click over here in the test reporter on the test that I want. I'm going to hit open. It's going to bring me right to my root skill view test. And let's do it. Let's go protected, static, async. Clicking is an async operation. So we are going to want to await for the click operation to complete. And we're going to say clicking feedback renders dialog. Pretty straightforward. Start with an await and say vc assert dot renders dialog. The first argument to that is the view controller on which render and dialog is called. This is just going to be our root skill view controller. We've already got that referenced locally. And then the next thing is a callback function that is the action that renders the dialog. Whatever we're going to invoke that's going to call the render and dialog method. And in this case, we actually want to render the dialog when a button is clicked. So fair question, how do we click a button in a test? There's an answer to that. It's called the interactor. So I'm just going to start typing interactor. And you see right here, we have the interactor that is pulled from the Heartwood View Controllers module. Hit enter. And look at all these things. We have click button hint, click button bar, click button in row, click a calendar event, click a cell, click a checkbox, click a destructive button in a footer, or a destructive button in a row. Well, let's just, for now, just click a button. And then it's asking us which view controller holds the button. And in this case, it's the card view controller inside of our root. So it looks like this.vc.get card vc. And then the second thing is the button's ID, which is feedback. So let's see. Clicking failed because the button feedback does not have an on-click set. Well, let's address that. Let's jump over to the root skill view controller. Let's find feedback. And in here, I'm going to say on click. And because all this error is talking about is not having an on click, we're just going to start by defining that and have it do nothing. You'll have the most success in this platform and TDD in general if you only ever solve the problem right in front of you and try not to think ahead. And these assertion libraries inside of the Spruce platform, a lot of time was spent ensuring that they walk you through the steps to complete whatever objective you're trying to complete. Now you see we're getting a real error that, or let's say a error more precisely tied to what we're trying to accomplish, which is render in dialog. So this .render in dialog was not invoked in your view controller within 5,000 milliseconds. So the assertion around a dialog will run your action. And if your action is something that takes a long time, it will wait up to 5 seconds. In our case, the click operation is an empty callback happened pretty fast. We're not having to wait for that 5,000 millisecond timeout. Okay, so as a matter of convention, I am going to pass the onClick a reference to a method that doesn't exist. So I'm going to say handle click feedback and then bind this. You can use an arrow function or do it inline. I prefer just the clean syntax of the methods just traditionally defined, not as arrow functions. One of the quirks of JavaScript and anything derived from or is a superset of JavaScript is there's the scoping issues, and that's why I'm binding it. But how to deal with scope in JavaScript is definitely not part of this lesson. So I'm going to say private async handle click feedback. Save that. This is actually not going to do anything, right? Because I just changed from one empty function literal to an empty reference to an empty function. But now we're going to do the fun piece. Now we're just going to call this .render in dialog. And it takes a dialog view controller options object. So I'm going to just do the curlies and single quote. And look at this. So if you were paying very close attention, which I totally get if you didn't see this, a dialog view controller is just a card. So it's got all the same properties as a card, body, header, footer. Well, for now, just so we can render something, I'm going to drop in a header and a title and say, hello, dialog world. Bang. All right, let's see if this passes. It passed. Let's go check it out. I'm going to jump back over here, hit Command R to refresh. I'm going to close this little checklist behind just to clean up that view. And let's hit feedback. Hello, dialog world. We did it. We're done. Now there is one thing to, well, okay, obviously we're not done, but we've got a dialog rendering, which is a big first step, pretty easy. But if you saw over here, there's some redundancies, repetition I really want to take care of. You see here, we've got this.vc.getCardVC, this.vc.getCardVC, and just following this rule of like the more dots in a call, like every dot exponentially increases the pain of a refactor. I'm going to select this little operation here that gets the card VC. I'm going to Control Shift R. I'm going to say extract to method. I'm going to just call it card VC, change the class reference, and then I'm actually going to create an overridden getter. And what that's going to do is that's going to treat this call as when I'm utilizing it as if it were a property, because I don't really want to know, or do I care when I'm doing these assertions that it's actually accessing the card VC from the root VC SPI. None of that's important. And what this does is, one, it simplifies the code. It seems pretty readable. But then two, I'm guarded from a refactor. So if I decide to rename this card, or I want to rename it something in the test that's different from what is production code, which sometimes can happen, I'm really guarded against the pain of a refactor. Well, okay. According to our plan, the next piece of this is rendering a form. So let's render a form. Okay. On our path to creating this form, we have a choice. We can continue to test and develop inside our root skill view controller, or we can break out and create, let's say, a feedback card view controller and begin testing in there separate from our root skill view. Now, there's some trade-offs to either of these approaches. If we continue to test in this file, it's pretty easy because, like, we just keep going. Downside is that the root skill view controller starts to test behaviors that are technically part of other experiences. So you have to ask kind of the question something like, should the root skill view test be testing submitting feedback, or should its test be scoped to rendering the feedback form, and then should we separately then test the feedback capability against the feedback form card? And I'm kind of thinking the latter. So let's get out of the root skill view test and let's get into tests that are focused solely on the feedback card that we have not yet created. So it's pretty simple. Step one, break out the feedback card into its own view controller. Then step two, begin testing the functionality of that separately from the root. So let's start with step one, breaking out of here into a feedback card view controller. And that's pretty straightforward, but until you see it, it might not be that intuitive. So we're asserting that a dialog is rendering. If I hover over this, you see that this assertion does return a dialog view controller. Now, let's get that. I'm going to call dialog VC equals. And then we have a useful assertion in our view controller assert library that looks something like this. VC assert dot renders as instance of. And we're going to say dialog VC, but I want it to render as a feedback card view controller. Now, I have not created this yet, so this is going to blow up on me, and it should. And it should actually blow up not on it not rendering that view controller, but the fact that there is no feedback card view controller even defined. So let's create that. I'm going to hit Control Space. Well, that's going to bring me to my watcher, so I'm going to Control Space again and go restart. So my watcher is now dead because I had started it using Control Space, and you can only have one Spruce CLI command running at a time. And let's say create.view. Now this time, instead of creating a skill view controller, we're just going to create a standard view controller. We're going to call it feedback card. Now, every view controller will automatically add view controller to the end of the name, so we don't need that. And it is always, and at least I would say generally, but I have not found a case where it is not true, putting the type of view model being rendered in the name of your view controller is very helpful. In this case, we're going to create a card. There's lots of other things that I'll show you in a second that we can create. So I'm going to call this the feedback card. And it's going to give me the Pascal case examples just to ensure that it's named correctly. The default there is fine. And now it's asking us what we're rendering, which view model. And we have a big form, a button, a calendar, calendar event. There's the card, card body, card header, dialog, form, list, big. Then we kind of look background, a button. Well, we're just going to do a card. Now we've got it. You see we've generated one file, which is the feedback card.vc. We've updated a file, which is our views.ts, which is the generated file that holds all of that brings together all of our views and the types. Hit a key to hide that. Now I'm going to click here, hit period, or if that doesn't work, finish typing. So I deleted the R and retyped it. I can't explain why exactly, like a command period here or control R or command R, why it wouldn't bring me my import. But if that happens, just delete the last character of a variable, retype it. You can see it's giving me the import suggestion. I'm gonna hit enter and save. So that's going to solve our referencing something that doesn't exist here, but it's now going to bring us back to the actual error more closely tied to our test, which is our view controller not rendering as an instance of the feedback card view controller. So in order to make that work, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to command click on feedback card view controller. And in this platform, anytime we're dealing with view controllers, we're almost always going to favor encapsulation over extension. So we are, instead of rendering a view model ourselves, we're going to wrap a card view controller, and our feedback card view controller is just more going to act as in a way that controls. So it's encapsulation versus extension. And so I'm going to start by just having the feedback card view controller render a card that's pretty much a recreation of what we had, but we'll change a thing so we can know it's working. So I'm going to say this dot card vc equals this dot controller, so a controller factory, and let's make it a card. Let's for now give it a header with a title of hello feedback card. And then in the render, I'm going to say this dot card vc dot render. Okay. We're not defined here, so I'm going to command period and say declare the card VC property. So we'll say private, and this is a card controller. All right. So now we've got a feedback card that encapsulates a card view controller that we're going to take control of. Lots of controlling here in a moment. But before then, let's go into our root.svc. And let's, instead of rendering a view model directly, let's render our feedback card. So I'm going to say const feedback card vc equals this, and then use the controller factory. And look at that, 8-bit stories, feedback dash card. No view model, no options are passed to it. That might change. In this case, I don't think it will. And then instead of rendering a view model, passing a view model here, we're going to say feedback card vc.render. There it is. So let's test that this worked. Now, if you recall, when I hit Control Space to pull up the Spruce CLI, I actually killed the view watcher. Rather than starting the view watcher using the Spruce CLI shortcut, because again, VS Code only lets us have one of those at a time, I'm going to hit Control Shift tilde. That's going to bring up a new terminal, and I'm just going to start the watcher right from here. So say spruce watch.views. While that's booting up, I'm going to jump back to the test reporter. We've got our test passing again, so let's go back here. Let's refresh, and let's click feedback. Hello, feedback card. Well, all right. Let's start our next test and get into the actual form. Okay, now that we've successfully rendered a feedback card, now we can create a new test and start testing that directly, and we don't have to go and constantly update the root skill view controller test. Again, this separation of concerns with our test is going to make life a lot easier for us. But before I actually hit Control Space and create a test, I'm going to go into the source tests behavioral, and I'm going to add a new directory here. So right click, folder, call it feedback. And I'm going to put the test in there. So let's do that. Go to control space, create test. And I'm just going to call the test, it's a behavioral test, feedback card. Let's put it in the feedback directory and let's have it extend just our spruce fixture test. Perfect. Let's jump back to our test reporter and we are failing, which is actually good news. Okay. First thing we're going to do is we're going to assert that the feedback card renders a form. So let's go to, let's say this, renders a form. Drop that, this, and let's go const vc equals this. Now views, because we're in a test, we get our view controller factory method from the views fixture. And let's call it feedback form, right? Feedback card. And now, instead of using the VC assert utility, we're going to use the form assert utility. So let's say form assert dot card renders form VC. And we can optionally, if we have multiple forms, pass a form ID. We're not going to do that. We don't need to. Could not find a form. You know, not wrong. So let's jump into the feedback card and let's start our form view controller. So let's start like we do any other view controller. We'll go this dot form VC equals this controller form. Now we could just pass options, but forms actually have some really helpful typing that we're going to want to leverage. Unfortunately, the only way that we can get the typing in our view model is by using this build form function, which just literally returns what you pass it, but it provides much better and more sophisticated typing than the factory method here, which has to handle all the types for all of the view models there, or the view controllers that exist. So let's go build form. I'm going to hit quote and let's see what's required here. So it looks like the first thing is a schema, and a schema is actually a big part of the platform. And so if you go to the documentation and you go to concepts, there's an entire section dedicated to schemas. You can think of schemas as the way to define the shape of data. Also, the schema library that we use, Spruce Schema, has a lot of helpful functionality, like validating values against a schema or normalizing against a schema. So the validation is pretty clear that it'll throw an error if a validation fails, but the normalization might not be as clear. An example of that is, let's say you have a schema that defines age, a field called age, and it's a type number. If we pass an object to the normalization function, but we set age to a string, it'll just convert it to a number for us. So everything ends up in the proper type when it goes through the normalization process. Again, all this is available if you go to the documentation and concepts and then schemas. So in order to create a schema, we use the build schema function. And in here are a few things that are required. One, we need an ID. So we're going to call this the feedback form. And let's define some fields. You know what? We don't even need to define fields right now. I'll just keep it empty. And I hit save. Then the next thing, this is yelling at us because section is required. So let's add sections. But let's make it empty. So now we have our form with a schema. There's nothing in it, but we're still getting a could not find form error. Because what we need to do is we need to render the form into the card. And forms go into the body of a card. And just as a refresher, let me jump over here and go help, docs, and go concepts. Again, if you want to learn about schemas, that you can do so in here, but we're going to go right to views. And just as a refresher, you have your card, a header, a section, and a body, and a footer, a header, body, footer, and inside of a body, you have multiple sections. Inside each section is where we render all other view controllers. So we're going to jump back over here. And then we're going to go body and then sections. And that's an array of sections. And the first section, we have all of the view controllers or view models available. And we're going to go form. And in this case, we're going to say this dot form vc dot render. Yeah, right on. We did it. Should we just go, maybe just go take a look, see what it looks like before we do our cleanup? I'm going to close the help docs. Back here, go refresh and hit feedback. Yeah. So now we have a cancel button and a go button and then just an empty form, which makes essentially our card look empty. And then we have hello feedback card. Let's just, while we're thinking about it, let's change that header to tell me what you think. Bam. So let's fix a little bit of this typing. Now, and then also let's clean up this constructor a little bit. First thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to start with the most innermost element that I want to extract and then extract my way higher and higher. So the deepest thing in here is the schema. So let's extract that out. Let me go make sure I select it correctly right here and say, I'm going to move this to module scope. So we're going to say feedback form schema. I'm going to cut this and move it to the bottom because when you're in here, you're not going to want to actually see it. Not until you actually want to, which you can command click on. The next thing I'm going to do is extract the creation of the form VC out. So I'm going to go extract a method, call it form VC. Again, capitalizing the method name to indicate an object is going to be instantiated or created. I'm going to do the same thing with card VC. Now we still have some typing issues. So I'm going to click on form VC, command period, say declare property form VC, and it's going to be a form view controller. But we're not done yet because a form view controller is actually a generic. By passing the form view controller the type of our schema, it's actually going to give us a lot of great autocomplete and IntelliSense functionality. So the easiest way to do that would be to start with here and go type of and say feedback form schema, feedback form schema. And now we've got a fully typed form. Okay, you might feel differently about this than I do, but I really dislike this type of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it, Control-Shift-R, extract type alias, and I'm going to go feedback form schema. And then I'm going to just move it down to the bottom. Perfect. So let's jump back to the feedback form test. And how about this test? We assert that the form is rendering a field called feedback. So if we jump back over to our wireframe, we have one field called feedback. And it is a text area. So 2 things that we can handle there pretty quickly. Let's write our next test. Oops. Protected, static, renders, feedback field. Now, before I get started, I'm going to remove this async. It's technically not needed. I don't want to have to instantiate this feedback card again. So I'm going to, before even writing the redundant or repetitive code, I'm going to just change this to a local reference. Then that's going to allow me to command period and go declare. And look, it imported for me in a way that could not have been worse. It would have been honestly better to just not even try to import it, but here we are. Cool. So let's go up to here. Let's go protected static async before each. Wait super now before each. And then I'm just going to option up arrow this bad boy into the for each. And now I don't have to construct another feedback card. Let's use the form assert. And let's go form renders field. And let's say this.vc. Now this is a card view controller, but we want to pass it a form view controller. So once again, we're going to implement this the way we wished it worked, and then go ahead and implement it using a test double, probably another spy. So we'll go this.vc. get form VC, and the field that I want is feedback. This .vc.getFormVC is not a function, which is correct. So let's create our spy class. Spy feedback card extends feedback card view controller public get form VC. Let's return this .c. This is going to get mad at us because this is private. So I'll command click on it and make it protected, which keeps it from being public. So nobody messes with it unless they're extending our view controller. And again, in this platform, you're very rarely extending, mostly just encapsulating. So the test doubles is really the primary use case for ever changing a property or a method to protect it from private. So let's go drop this into the view controller factory. So this .views .set controller. And let's make it our feedback card and let's pass it that. So we should get the error that we want here, which is form does not render a field name feedback. Make sure it's in your form schema and set in form.sections.fields. Well, I kind of want to get this typing fixed like we did last time. So I'm going to change the type to the property to that. This is going to get mad because the controller factory method is expecting to return a feedback card, not the spy, but because we extend it, it's totally fine to typecast it, which is going to give us exactly the error we want without any of the types. There's an unused variable there, so I'll get rid of that. Okay, this is it. The form does not render a field name feedback. So this is a two-step process. Is the first thing we're going to do is, oh, get over there, I'm into the wrong thing. We're going to go to the feedback VC, and we're going to go into the form VC, and I'm going to command click on the feedback form schema, and let's add the feedback field. So let's say feedback. Let's make its type text. Let's make sure it is required. And if you're in the schema and you want to see all the different things this field has available, we can set a hint. We can make it an array. We can set its default value. We just did required. We can set a label. So schemas support hints and labels. And those are actually helpful because they get generated into the types. So when we give a hint and the typing system, the schema system will generate actual interfaces based off those schemas. The comments, the hint becomes a comment on the property of the interface. And that can be very, very helpful when you're trying to use IntelliSense or any autocomplete. So we have a choice. I'm going to give this a label of feedback. And then we're going to get into how we can change the presentation of this schema in the form without actually touching the schema, because the schema, we really mostly care about the essence of the shape of the data, what does it represent, and the types of fields it has. The form is responsible for decorating it as far as the presentation is concerned. Actually, look at that any. I do not want that in there. Okay, so we have some sections. Let's create our first section. We hit the single quote. We can see there's a class name, fields, ID, list, should render as grid, text or title. What we want are fields, which is an array. Now look at that. Because of the typing system, I'm able to add fields as an array, do a single quote, and it shows me all the fields available in the schema. So for instance, if I had gone down here and I went another field, type number, well, actually check this out. Here, look at all these types. Address, Boolean, date, time, directory, duration, email, file, ID. ID is useful as a primary key field, and because sometimes that's a string, like in Mongo, other times that's a number, like in Postgres or MySQL or any other auto-incrementing relational database. But then here's an image, a number, a phone. Raw is kind of just saying, like, I'm going to deal with it. You don't touch it. You don't worry about it. Schema. So you can have one schema reference another schema. There's a select where you can give it choices. You can think of this as like an enum, and then renders as a drop down. There's text, and that's it. So we're just going to make this a number because all I want to do is show you when I'm in here and hit single quote. Now it's showing me another field. So this typing gets to be really powerful as we can begin to drop from our brain all the details of the schema because the autocomplete will bring it back up for us. Okay, so now we have feedback. I'm going to cut another field. I do not want that. And let's see how this renders. So refresh. Feedback. Yeah, not bad. I want to change some things though. I want to change the label and I want this to render as a text area. So first let's update the label. So rather than going into the label of the schema, which the reason why we even have a label in a schema is because when types are generated, it'll output it as a comment to give us a little bit more information. But also when we're using schemas to define our API, the label is helpful in those contexts also. So there's a lot of areas where a label or a hint is helpful on the schema to describe the data, but we don't want to mix really any of that presentation itself with the structure of the data. These are two independent things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the fields block. Now we can define a field as the string that represents the key of the fields block of the schema. So in this case, feedback, the field's name. Or we can make an object where the name is feedback. But then look at this. Now we can start to override the things that are in the schema with how we actually want them to present. So I want to change this label and we'll say something like, tell us what you think or how we can make this better. And we've updated the label and how it presents in the form without having to mutate the schema. Feedback. There it is. Tell us what you think or how we can make this better. Next thing we need to do is we want to render it as a text area. So we have a choice. We can just go and set right here the render as. Here are all the render as options. Autocomplete, checkbox, color picker, number, password, blah, blah, blah. We can just set it. Or we can write an assertion to check against it. Now, this is where we kind of get to this idea of like, what's discipline and what's dogma? We really don't often want to test presentation. So should we write an assertion here? Should we not? Now, I'm going to write an assertion here just to demonstrate the VC assert or the form assert and its capabilities here. But it's up to you if this is a thing you want to test. Just again, my rule of thumb is generally speaking, when it comes to the presentation of something, I don't test it until something goes wrong, which you could say is probably not the greatest approach. But frankly, when it comes to presentation, it's so opinionated and they change so much and it's so fluid that, again, it's not until someone or we notice that something has really gone off the rails that it's even useful to test presentation. But again, I'm going to do it right now just to show you the capabilities. So we'll say renders feedback field. I'm going to say test detected static renders feedback as text area, which is actually one word. Form assert field renders using instance of. No. That's a renders as this.vc.get form VC. The field's name is feedback, and I expect it to be, look at those, a text area. So let's jump into feedback.vc. It says, look, the field name feedback is rendering as name feedback label, tell us specific, blah, blah, but I expect it to render as a text area. Render as. There's tags, not tags, text area. Let's let this finish. Okay, we want to see it? Let's go see it. Jump back over, hit Command R to refresh. Feedback. There it is. It's a text area. Let's do one more thing before we're done with this piece. Let's add a section above the form that just tells the person using this how grateful we are that they're using it at all. And I am not going to assert any of this. I just want to go here and do the section above the form. Let's call it a text. And inside of text, there's alignment. So we could do like left, center, right. There's content, which is just the copy we want dropped in as it is. And then there's HTML. So you can just drop in your paragraph tags or numbered lists and whatever you want. And then you can see that in action. But in this case, I just want some content. I'm going to say, we so appreciate you using our skill to write stories. It means a lot to us, and we also really look forward to your feedback. Exclamation mark point. Okay, the tests are going to rerun. Again, we're not testing presentations, so nothing should change. Let's jump over here. Let's go refresh. Let's see feedback. And look. And if, as you noticed, we have some nice animation and things coming in there as we click it. Okay, let's do a little bit of cleanup on our test. Let's go here. Do you see this? Again, every dot exponentially increases the difficulty of a refactor, and I've got this .vc.getFormVC in two places. I'd rather not. Control-Shift-R, change it to a method called FormVC. Again, I'm going to treat this as a property because as far as my tests are concerned, I do not care where you're getting this FormVC from. I just want to assert against it. Okay. Let me take a look. Do you know what I think? One last thing. So there's a cancel button here, and then if you notice, the go button is not enabled until I drop in whatever I need to drop in. So we have some options here. We could make the cancel button hide the dialog, but already clicking off to the side hides the dialog, and clicking the X hides the dialog. So again, we have options. So click, so hit feedback, click, or we hit feedback and close. So I personally think the cancel button's a little redundant. So let's just get rid of it. Again, this is a presentation thing, your choice if you want to assert it against it or not. The case I would make to actually write the assertion to make sure there is no cancel button is because if you accidentally do display it and it has no behaviors attached to it, that gets reported as a bug. Whereas like a copy change, maybe also will get reported as a bug. But because I very intentionally want to hide this button and ensure nobody accidentally brings it back, I'm going to write the assertion against it. So let's go down here for test. Objective static does not render cancel button. And let's go assert. So we're not going to use the form assert for this since we can just use a getter on the form. And so I'm going to bring in the assert library from the test utils library module. And let's say is false. This dot formvc dot get should render cancel button. Say you should not be rendering the cancel button. All right, you should not be rendering the cancel button. True does not equal false. Let's jump into feedback. See into our form. And let me go, let's just do it above the schema. Should show cancel button. The answer to that is a no. Go, let's let this go. Let's pass. Now, because our test reporter is in smart mode, it's going to make sure that the file we change passes. And once it does, it's going to zoom out and test everything. Which it did. Let's refresh. And I expect there to be no cancel button. Go here, put that in. Should not do anything. It will not do anything. Well, let's close it. Okay. We've got our dialog rendering. We've got it rendering our form. We've got the right fields required that we want. We've hidden the cancel button. We have a back button in the wireframe. I don't think Need that. Next up is emitting an event. Well, an event, again, is how we communicate with the back end of our skills. So let's get into that next. Okay, it's event submitting time. Let's get to the point where our tests are failing in such a way that requires us to define our first event. So let's go back to the feedback card test. Scroll down here, and let's write the test to assert that when you submit the form, the submit feedback event is emitted. So let's start there. Test. Check did. Static async. Submitting form emits submit feedback event. All right. So what we're essentially going to do in principle is we're going to create a listener for this event, and we're just going to make sure the callback for that listener is called when we submit the form. So it looks something like this. We're going to go await event faker, and that's in the Spruce test fixture module, and go on. And our event doesn't exist yet, so we're not going to get autocomplete, but that's totally fine because, again, we're going to allow the failing tests to really force us into doing this well. We're just going to start giving it our best guess. So I'm going to say 8-bit stories dot submit feedback. And then the second argument to the on method is the callback, and I'll say was hit equals true. Now remember, as part of TDD, I'm writing this the way I wish it worked, and then I'm going to go fix it. So we don't have a was hit variable, but now I know I need one. So let's go let was hit equals false. And let's go await interactor dot submit form, and we pass it the form VC. So this dot C. It's the first step. And then let's go assert dot is true. I'll say this. Form did not emit submit event. Okay. So there's one thing to consider here is that the submit is not going to work because we have a field that's required. We have to fill out the feedback field for the submission to even work. So I'm just going to fill that out right now. This dot vc dot set value. Now check this out. See, the name is feedback. So we're getting all these helpful types based off that schema. So I'm going to single quote feedback. And I'm going to use what I do generally in these situations is just generate an ID to just give us an empty value. So see inside of the test utils module, we have generate ID. There. So now we're setting the value and we're submitting the form. And the form did not emit the submit event. So let's go make it do that. So if I go feedback form.vc, instead of our form VC is an on submit, and I'm going to just reference a method I have not created yet. This dot handle submit, bind it rather than using an arrow function. Pub or private async handles submit. Okay, we're getting there, but we still have not emitted anything. So how do we emit an event? It looks like this. We go, first thing we need is a Mercury client. So const client equals await this dot connect to API. Now we need to emit the event. So let's go await client dot emit. And we're going to choose emit and flatten responses. I'll get into what that is versus just emit in a second. And let's call it, what do we call it? 8-bit stories dot submit feedback. You notice we are missing the version number. Again, totally fine. There we go. Look at this. The signature for 8-bit feedback is valid. You either have to create the event using spruce create.event, set your event to global, or add a target that includes an org location. Choose wisely. Well, in this case, we actually need to create the event. So I'm going to hit Control Space, and we're going to go create.event. What is the readable name? Submit feedback. Now it's going to give us the kebab case, which is how we name the events as part of the event name, which is part of the fully qualified event name. And then it's going to give us a camel case just to verify we got the naming right. We did. Sweet. Take a look at this. We actually generated 10 files because I had to bring down a bunch of things. It skipped a bunch though. So here are the files it generated. Rather than taking you through these, let's go back here. Let's go help. And let me take you through the documentation about all the files that were generated. And we'll just kind of do this stuff. Events, hand in hand. Okay. Oops. So here is the event structure. Let's get this here. And let's go here, trash this, jump back to the test reporter. And let's go events. So check this out. So we have events, the event name, the event version. So this is the first version you create is set by the date you create it. I'm going to hit Command B. Let me show you inside a package.json. Or no, I mean, it is the date you create it. Okay. Whoops. So it starts with the event name and then the date you created it. We've got our payload target, our event.options, and our response payload. If we go back over here, we have our emit payload, emit target, our event options, our response payload. And these are essentially exactly what they sound like. So our emit payload builder is where we build the schema that represents the payload. Our target builder is where we define the schema that represents the target. Event options is where we're going to get into permissions and some other things, and setting something as global or scoped. That is, do we have to be installed at an organization, or can we just globally emit it? Now, because our skill here will not be installed by a company or an organization, all our events are going to be global. But as you get more and more advanced and you want to be able to monetize your skill by requiring a company to pay for it to install it, we'll get into that too, but not as part of this training series. And then there's the response builder. And all of these three builders are schemas, and then event options is just how we can define the scope or permissions and other things like that. So let's go right now and let's design our event. So I'm going to start with the payload. And right now it just has a text field. Let's call it feedback. Let's make its type text, and let's make it is required true. Then, so you see this is the submit feedback emit payload. Then let's go to the target. We actually don't need a target. We're just going to emit the event. Then let's go to event options. So is global is true. Now we should define who has permission to emit this event. Now by default, a skill can emit their own event and listen to their own event. Because you're an admin in your development theater, when you set it up, you enter your phone number, you're going to be able to do this too. But someone who's just visiting and looking around is not going to be able to submit this event. They are going to get a permission denied. So we're going to address that in 1 second. Now let's go to the response payload. And here's an interesting thing. If your event signature defines a response payload, then the Mercury client, when it emits the event, will wait for a response. If we have no fields, the event or the client will not wait. It will just emit the event and move on. Now, there are times where both of these are useful. So firstly, as far as feedback goes, I expect this to be mostly instant. So we are going to define a field, but when we go to generate our story, that's going to take some time for the AI to, what are we at? Chat GPT IO? I don't know. It's tough to keep up with. That could take longer than 30 seconds. So that 30-second timeout's baked into Mercury. We don't want a timeout error hitting. So in the generate story events that we'll get to in later chapters, we're actually not going to define a response. So we can emit the event, and then we're going to let the story generate. And then on the other side, we're going to emit a did generate story event and send that to the front end. So the person who generated the story can be alerted to it being completed. So a good way to think about this is in events where you need an immediate response or you need to know if it succeeded, just define a response payload. And in events where they're long running, do not define a response payload and listen for an event on the other side of the long operation. So in this case, because I want to know if submitting feedback failed or succeeded, which means just that eventually like sending a message, I'm going to define a field here just for the sake of having it respond. So I'm just going to call that field success. This is just a convention that we have here. I'm going to call its type is Boolean and is required true. And now we define our event. Let's hit control space and let's go sync.events. So anytime you change any of the builders or event options or anything, you're going to want to run sync.events again. So the types are generated, the event contracts are generated, everything gets regenerated. Okay, so now we've got that in. Let's go back to the test reporter. And let's go, wait, did I go to event options and make that true? I did. So let's go into here and let's go fix this. Now I can delete this. Look at that. There's the fully qualified event name. And let's do the same thing in the feedback card. So if I go feedback card.vc and delete that, now we've got our proper event signature. So look at this. The emit payload you passed to 8bitstories.submitFeedback v 2024-09-19 is invalid. Submit feedback, emit target, and payload has one error. Payload is required. Now watch this. So the second argument to emit and flatten, if I go here and I create this, it's got a payload because that's the only thing we defined. We did not define a target. And then there's source. We don't ever really set source. That's done for us in the background for the client. And the source will tell us who emitted the event, either their skill ID or a person ID or actually a proxy token. And we'll get into that when we get into listeners. So for now, let's just define the payload. And this should be mad because if we hover over here, it's going to say it doesn't match. And look at this error we got. The emit payload you passed is invalid. Payload.feedback is required. So let's go feedback and let's just drop in gibberish. And then it says one more error. The response payload to submit feedback is invalid. Submit feedback response success is required. So I'm going to click here, open the test. And from here, you see it's mad. It says void is not assignable to this return an object. Now, because this is all typed, I can single quote. And so it says catch finally then, which are tied to a promise. So we can make this async or just success. I'm going to just return success equals true. Great. Now we're emitting an event. But as you can see, we're only putting in a little bit of gibberish as feedback. So before we continue, let's define our permissions contract so we can get that over the line to ensure that we don't accidentally publish this skill, and then when someone tries to submit feedback, they're just going to get a permissions error, which again, we're not going to see because our phone number is tied to our admin account. Okay, let's do it. Okay, permissions. So first thing we're going to do, we are going to create a permission contract, and we are going to define who has permission to submit feedback, and we'll probably at most just require someone to be logged in. So someone can't anonymously submit feedback, they have to log in, and that provide at least some safeguards around just getting spammed on the feedback form. Plus, the way the feedback form works in a dialog and the way we'll do it, it'll be hard to spam anyway, because there'll be some clicks involved to bring it back up and to resubmit, because we're going to close the dialog after submit. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with permissions. I'm going to start by hitting Control Space and go create.permissions. Name your permission contracts. I'm just going to call it 8-bit stories. And it's going to show us the camel case, 8-bit stories. That looks good. Look at that. Generated one file, 8-bit stories permissions. You know what? I actually don't care for that name. I want to do it without the dashes. So I'll just right click on that and go delete, move to trash, and then I'll go create.permissions again. And let's just do it as one word. 8-bit stories. It's all one word. Perfect. There it did. Generated one file, 8-bit stories.permissions.ts. So I command click on that. And we have our permission contract, which ends in .permissions.ts. We have an ID, a name, and a description. Require all permissions. So when we're checking permissions, we can check against the whole contract or any specific permission in that contract. And an example of that might be, let's say we want a permission contract that defines all the permissions related to managing inventory. So let's say we created a inventory permissions contract, and inside it can be like add to inventory, update quantity, can delete from inventory. So what we can do is we can specify that somebody should have access to all the inventory management skill views if they pass the check against the inventory permission contract. And in here, this will require all permissions is false. So what would happen is we would say, does this person pass the inventory permission contract? And if require all permissions is false, it'll go through and check every permission. And if any of them are true, it will pass. And then effectively we let them into the inventory management area, where then tied to each event or each resource, we have a more granular permission check. Then we can also set that to true, which would mean in order for this person to pass the permission contract check, they have to have all the permissions on it. For now, though, we're not going to use the permission contract concept any more than a placeholder for our permissions. So let's start by defining our first permission. So there's can high-five. Let's say can submit feedback. Let's give it a name of just can submit feedback. Then a description. I don't need a description. Let's cut that. Now here are our default values. So one of the things we try to do in this platform, and I think it's generally good practice, is have what we call sane defaults. And in this case, you can see there's a guest, an owner, a group manager, a teammate, a manager, anonymous. These are all what we call base roles. We don't need to worry about any of this now. You can go into the concepts area of the documentation and go to roles, permissions, and read all about it. This, again, ties more when we're in a multi-tenant environment and you have multiple companies signed up and they're defining their roles. For now, though, we just want to give somebody who's logged in permission. So I'm going to delete all of this, and single quote will tell us all the properties we have available. And we're looking for logged in. Now, this is an object. Now, inside of here, here are all the different authorizer statuses that are tied to the logged in state. So we can be clocked in, clocked out. Default just applies to everything, and then off-prem and on-prem. So this means off-premises or on-premises. So we can actually give someone permission only if they are clocked in, on location, at a location. And the idea here being, let's say you're a business that wants to allow your team to use their phone, but you don't want to give them access to the system when they're at home, so you don't have to pay their cell phone bills. In that case, you could say only give them permission if they are on premises, or only give them permission if they're clocked in, or both. But because we're not worried about any of that right now, we are going to just set the default to true. So this means that anybody who's logged in will pass the can submit feedback check. Now, if I go back to the test report or nothing's changed, we need to drop this into the event signature. Before we do that, though, we need to sync permissions because we've made changes to the permission contract. So I'm going to hit Control Space and go sync.permissions. This is going to generate all the permission contracts final form and all the types and everything here. So you see permissions types. Now check this out. Now we can go to events, submit feedback, and then the version, and we go to event options, and let's do emit permissions, and we're going to build a permission reference. And the first thing is the event contract. So here are all the event contracts we have available, like locations, messaging, organization, peoples. We have permissions contract where you can see who has permission to change permissions, roles and skills. But in this case, we have 8-bit stories. So this is the namespace of our skill. This is the name of our permission contract. So it's a little repetitive, but that name spacing is important because we might have multiple of the same name permission contract, but in different skills, which will be separated by namespace. The second argument to this are the permissions they must have to emit this event, which is an array. And you see it says permission IDs any, means that they will be able to emit this event if any of the permissions pass. So I tap that single quote, and we've only got one permission. It's can submit feedback. So with that, hit save. Now, as you notice, we're not testing any of this. As far as we're concerned, this is all just configuration, and we don't generally, just like presentation, we rarely test presentation. We also really don't test configuration unless it becomes complicated enough or has caused us a problem in the past, and there's a good reason. Testing configuration just means your test break whenever you reconfigure something. And that's actually really a pain in the butt. So now that we've added the emit permission to this event, I'm going to hit Control Space. I'm going to run sync.events. And you can see we got these two files updated, generated some new ones, and we are good. We have defined our permissions. So I think next step, let's clean up our directory structure just a little bit so we can get, have it a little bit more tidy. Okay, let's do that. Probably one of my favorite parts, get a little bit of tidying up. I'm gonna Command-Shift-E to get to the Explorer. So if you see inside of our test directory, we have our behavioral tests. Inside of that, we have feedback. Let's create a feedback directory at the source, in the source directory of our skill, and let's put everything feedback related inside of that. So I'm going to new folder, feedback. So the first thing feedback related is the event. So I'm going to drag the events in there. And then if we go into view controllers, our feedback card will go in there also. Now you'll notice this is a little bit, update imports. This is a little bit different than how you might and have gone about structuring things in the past. See, what I've seen done in a lot of places is you create directories that are actually named after the type of tool that you're building. So you might have like a utilities directory or a services directory, or a database adapters directory. I don't know. In Spruce, we actually create directories that map to the behaviors. So like I might be able to look at a project and say like, oh my gosh, I know this is a Ruby on Rails project because of how it's structured. When you look at a Spruce skill, you should be able to tell what the skill does rather than the types of tools and the building blocks from which it is made. So I can go into here and I can see we have feedback. And so I might not necessarily yet care about all the pieces that enable feedback in our skill, but I do know that everything feedback related is in here. And inside of our behavioral tests directory, we'll have a feedback directory also. So the behaviors that we have in our tests and the directory structure we have in our source will actually mirror each other. And again, it's much more useful to look at the folder structure of your skill and to know what it does than it is to look at the folder structure and know what tools are used. So we start with behaviors first, and then we work down to the tools themselves. So that's what allows me to go into the feedback directory and see we have an event, or eventually soon we're going to have a listener. We have our feedback card, and maybe we have other elements or components or utilities or libraries or whatever that enable feedback, and they'll all just go in the feedback directory. Okay, now that that is done, then the next test is let's make sure that the feedback that someone entered into the form is actually emitted with the event. So let's hit that next. All right. So, well, here's what we need to do. We need to check that the value that is set to the feedback field is past the event when it's emitted. So we can see here right now, it's just a string literal that I just typed in some gibberish. We want to make sure that it's set to the same value as the feedback field. So how do we do that? Well, first we're going to need to track what this value is. And then inside of our listener, we're going to pull out the feedback that was passed. So let me just show you some things here. If we go into this listener and I type target and payload, then I can go target and payload dot. Here's the payload and the source. Now, again, there is no target on this, so there's no dot target. So we go dot payload, and then here there should be one field, feedback. So we need to get the feedback that's passed to this event, and we need to check it down at the bottom of our test. So again, how do we do that? Well, let's take it in a few steps. First thing, let's track what is passed to the event here. So instead of doing target and payload and doing a bunch of dot accessors, I'm gonna just destructure payload out. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna destructure the feedback out of the payload. So if I hover over this, it's gonna be feedback's declared never read, right? And its type is string. So let's go past feedback equals feedback. You can name this whatever you want. I just like to call it past. You call it actual if you wanted. So I'm gonna go let past feedback is of type string or undefined. And then down here at the bottom, we're gonna go assert.is equal. And then we'll say past feedback. And then what are we checking? Expected. We don't have an expected because I'm just literally generating a random ID to drop in that. So let me select that and destructure that, extract that out. So let's go extract to constant and enclosing scope, and let's just call it expected. Perfect. Let's give this a little bit of a description here. Your payload, the feedback was not passed from the form, exclamation point. Not too worried about that message. Just got to be enough to point us in the right direction. If it fails, feedback you passed was not passed from the form. So let's do that. So right here, you can see we've got the string literal here. We're going to replace it with the variable that is the feedback. So let's go const feedback equals this dot form bc dot get value feedback. And let's drop it in place here. Yeah, we got it. Let's do a little test cleanup. So one thing that's interesting here is that by checking the feedback that was passed, we're also checking if it was hit. So in other words, the was hit check is kind of redundant, because if the listener wasn't hit, feedback wouldn't equal what we passed to the form. That being said, we can actually remove the was hit check. That you can think of it as what Bob Martin calls a stair stepper test. It just got us closer to the solution enough where we could really actually code the solution. So I'm just going to remove it. And this brings up what is a really good point. You cannot look at a test and know how someone got to the solution, because we went in and actually cleaned up the test and removed the pieces that got us to the finished test. So one more thing here with the submission of the event, we need to make sure that when this event is submitted, and if it were to fail for some reason and throw an error, that we're not redirected to the Heartwood's generic error page. So it's not, at least it's not a big ugly page, but it's still not great. What we prefer is that, well, let me say that differently. It's not a great experience, but it looks good. It'd be much better that if this event were to throw an error for some reason, let's say the send message fails, or there's a full on something just goes catastrophically wrong, we just want to render an alert and allow them to try to submit again, rather than having Heartwood catch the error and redirect them to the generic error page. So let's write that test, which is essentially like this test. Protected static async, submit feedback throwing renders alert. So first thing we need to do is make sure that the submit feedback event actually throws an error. So watch this. Event faker dot make event throw, and it's our submit. Oops, that's not it. Submit feedback. So now that it's just going to throw an error. So you can also pass the type of error you want to throw, but we're not really worried about that right now. Right? We just want to make sure that if submitting the form, if emitting this event when we submit the form throws an error, we want to render an alert instead of having Heartwood catch it and redirect it to a catastrophic error page. So now what's next? Well, next thing we need to do is what we did in the previous test. We need to fill out the feedback field to make the form valid. Well, in order to do that, we would need to call this set value again, but I don't want to do that. Let me just do this. Let's select the set value call, and let's just call this something like fill out feedback. And it is randomly filling out the feedback and then returning whatever the randomly generated value it dropped in. But in the case of this test, I actually don't care what it was filled out as. Just fill out feedback. Then the next thing we need to do is submit the form. I don't want to have to do this interactor.submit form, this dot. Just let's extract this to a method called submit. Now I don't just want to submit the form. I want to actually assert that an alert was rendered. So check this out. PC assert renders alert. What is rendering an alert is the feedback card VC, so this.vc. And what is the action? So we pass a callback that invokes submit. So this is actually going to fail, right? So look at this. It expected await this.alert to be called in your view, but it wasn't. We were interrupted by this error. A faked response to 8bitstories.submit feedback through an error. If this failed a test, it's time to try catch and possibly render an alert. If it was expected, meaning the test still passed, ignore it. Well, I think the errors kind of know what we're getting at here. So let's jump into this and let me show you something. Rather than doing and following these instructions and try catching, let's just go await this.alert and go message. So let me just single quote so you can see what an alert has as a message, a style, a title. style is error or critical or info. You can do an info alert and just to show some information. Let's do a message and let's say, oh no, submitting feedback failed. Please try again. I have no idea why this would happen, but watch this. So we passed the test that we were doing, submit feedback throwing renders alert, but we failed the test previous, which is submitting form emit submit feedback event. And look at this. Skill view 8-bit stories.feedback card unexpectedly rendered an alert. It reads, oh no, submitting feedback failed. Please try again. So you cannot render an alert without an assert. That will ensure that you don't accidentally gracefully handle an error when you don't expect an error to happen at all. So what we need to do is we need to make the changes to ensure that this alert is only rendered if emitting the event fails. So let's check that out. Let's go try. Oops. Catch. And then let's take this and drop it in. Now we should pass. Sweet. So let's do a few more things just to help us in case something were to go wrong. So for instance, this alert is nice because if something goes wrong, we get an alert, but it might make it a little bit difficult to debug if something were to go wrong. So let's at least log this error. So we'll go catch error, and then let's go this dot logs dot or log dot and see we have a log utility built into the view controller, and we can render an error in info. We can set a prefix. We can build a log. Even into those, you can go into the docs and check out all the different things you can do with loggers, or we can do a warning. And I'm just going to do an error and say submitting feedback failed. And then the second argument, I'm just going to pass it to error. Now that's mad because our type is unknown. I'm just gonna type it as any and hopefully not offend anybody too much. I'm not really worried about the type of this error. We're just gonna log it. Okay, that did it. I want to show you one more thing before we test this. See how we're calling emit and flatten response? Let's change this to emit. And here's what happens. So the alert was never called because even though we made this event throw, it actually didn't throw in the listener or in the emitter. So check this out. We'll go const response equals, and I'm just going to go console.log response just so I can set a breakpoint here. Now I'm going to go to this test and Command Shift D. I'm going to go test file. Here I'm going to hit Command U. Command B again to hide it. Command tilde to hide that because I just want to show you this, what we're looking at here. Okay. So we just emitted this event. This is the one that passes. So if we look at this response, it's got total contracts 1. So this is the amount of people who have been contracted to listen to the event. So you can think of this like total listeners. It had 0 total errors and 1 total response. Then if we go to the responses, we can see that the one response has a payload with an object of success equals true. Let me hit this one more time so we can see what happens when there's an error. So play. Now we go to response. We have total contracts 1, total errors 1, total responses 1. And then if we go into responses, we can see there's an error where the error is a faked response to this event through an error. If this is in a test and you might need to try catch, blah, 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 so on and so forth. So in a case where we actually do not want this event to throw an error, we just want to get back and tally and do some sort of logic if an error is thrown or whatever, we can just emit. Generally, though, we're going to use emit and flatten responses. Now, let me show you what the flatten part does here. So now if we go to responses, it is just one element with success true. So it goes into the response, finds all those responses, and flattens them into an array so you can just access them easily. Also, if I hit play again, it's not going to hit again because emit and flatten responses will check if there's an error in the responses, and if it finds one, it'll throw an error. So that's what that makes it a lot easier to work with the responses to an event. But there will be times where you're not going to want it to throw if there's an error, and then also you're going to want to do some sort of logic depending on who responds and if someone missed or if an error was thrown. But again, for the most part, we're just going to emit and flatten. We're going to let it throw an error if any response errored, and then we're going to avoid having to dig into that big Mercury response object that has all that metadata, at least for most cases. Okay, let's go and let's give it a shot. So we'll go refresh, we'll go feedback, enter some gibberish, and hit go. Alert, oh no, submitting feedback failed. But why? Well, let's go look. I'm gonna go developer, down to inspector. And this inspector is actually gonna start for you over here. I just went and broke it out to a new window. And let's go console. And let's see. It says invalid event name. Okay, this is good to know. So we did create this event, right? Why is it saying invalid event name? Well, that's because our view watcher does not refresh when we do backend changes, only view changes. So if we want our skill's new events to be registered, we actually can't use the view watcher. We just have to boot the skill. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command-Shift-D and switch this to boot. And then now I can just hit Command-U to boot the skill. So this is going to actually, well, let's see. Hold on. So now we just need to boot the skill. All right, let's go. Whoops. Yarn rebuild. Okay. Just hit to rebuild. Okay, so I'm gonna select boot, and then I'm gonna hit Command-U to boot the skill. And again, it's this full boot that is going to register the events and listeners. I mean, everything. It will also re-register our skill view controllers or our view controllers. Okay, so now, all right, now that I booted the skill, it's re-registered everything. So let's go over here. I've cleared out the developer console. I'm gonna hit refresh, go to feedback. Hey there. Hit go. Uh-oh, submitting feedback failed. Why? So let's check the error. 8-bit story, submitting feedback failed. Options, code, skill not listening. The fully qualified event name is 8-bit stories.submit feedback, and the friendly message is, oh no skill is listening to the 8-bit stories submit feedback event. I've let the proper humans know. So there's ways that in the documentation you can see how you can configure Mercury and the skills to when we do these types of logs to actually send it through Slack, or different, we call it log transport. And so that's kind of what that's alluding to, is when we get this all set up for production, we will be notified when these types of errors happen. I mean, right now I just get it all through Slack. Okay, so let's do one more thing before we consider the front end of this done. So I'm going to go back to the test reporter. We want the feedback form to close after someone submits. So right now it would submit and then it would just stay open, and we want it to close, right? So let's make it close. Now we actually are not going to do that test in the feedback card test, because the feedback card test is about submitting the feedback. We want to do that in the root skill view test, because that's where the actual closing the dialog behavior exists. So let's go to root skill view test, and let's say this test, and we'll say submitting feedback closes dialog. All right, now check this out. So let's go here. I'm going to do two things. I want to going to want to click the button to hit the feedback to render the dialog. Then we want to fill out the form, and then we want to submit. And then we want to ensure that the dialog is closed. So here's how we do that. I'm going to take all this and I'm going to extract this to a method, and I'm going to say click feedback and assert dialog. Cool. Down. So let's start there. Await this dot click feedback and assert dialog. But how do we actually simulate submitting the feedback, getting the feedback submitted? Well, here's something fun. The assert renders as instance of. You can see the return type is the feedback card view controller. So if I go const feedback card VC, then what I can do is I can go return feedback card VC and then const feedback card VC. So now I have the feedback card here. Well, if you recall, the feedback card is where the form is. So really, if you think about it, I just need to get the form VC and fill it out and submit it just like we did in the other test. So let's start by filling out the value of the feedback field of that form. So watch this. Await feedback card VC dot get form VC dot set value feedback, and let's just fill it out randomly. I don't really care. All right, look at that. Feedback.getFormVC is not a function. Of course it's not. We used a SPY to get that functionality before. So let's go back into our feedback card test and let's take this. Here's our feedback, our SPY feedback form. Let me select this and let's go move to file. And then let's go to our root skill view test. Let's go to the before each, and let's drop in our SPY for this also. Set controller, feedback form, and then let's go SPY feedback card. There. I expect that to actually work. But the typing didn't work. Why didn't the typing work? Well, because this asserts as instance of is going to return a view controller that matches the type that we passed to it, the class we passed to it. But so really what we need to do is similar to what we did above with our SPYs, is just cast it as a SPY feedback card. Now we've got our feedback being set. Now let's submit our feedback. Await interactor.submit form feedback card vc.get form vc. I expect this to fail. Can you guess why? Skill view 8-bit source card unexpectedly rendered an alert. It reads, "Oh no, submitting feedback failed. Please try again." So why did it fail? Well, it failed. Let's go back here and let's do this. Feedback card VC here. And let's do this. For our error message, so we get a little bit more. So these logs are muted during our tests. These are just for helpful in production environments. What I'll do here for our alert is do this. error.message. So now we'll just pass back the error message if one is set. And look at this. Skill view, 8-bit stories feedback card, unexpectedly rendered an alert. It reads, 8-bit stories submit feedback must be handled locally. You have two options. Make sure you have created a listener using spruce create.listener. So we're not ready for that yet. And that you booted your skill, or use the event faker. Well, let's use the event faker. So let's go to here. Let's just go to the top of this. Let's go await event faker on submit feedback. Whoops. And then this is like this. Remember, we have our success block. So that's true. Okay, so now we've used our SPY again to populate the form and submit it. So how do we check that the dialog was closed though? Well, if you see down here, we have assert renders dialog. It returns a dialog view controller and a feedback view controller. Here is what we returned. So what we actually need to do is we need to check that the dialog was hidden, that it's been hidden. So let's do that. Let's go like this. Watch this. Instead of returning just the feedback card, we're going to return the feedback and the dialog card, and then we're going to destructure it out of here. So nothing should have changed. And let's go dialog VC and watch this. Assert.is. Let's get this assert. Let's get the right assert in here from test spruce test utils. Dot is true. Dialog VC dot get is visible. That's actually false. Let's say this. You did not hide the form after submit. You did not hide the form after submit. That's true. We didn't. We should do that. So watch this. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go into the root skill view and we're going to write some things the way we wish it worked again. Okay. So we have our feedback card and we have render and dialog, but render and dialog returns a dialog view controller. So watch this. Let's get our dialog VC, and a dialog VC has a hide method. Hide. So that's going to render the dialog. It's going to hide it right away. And that passed. It's time to make our test a little bit stronger. So I'm going to go back to here. And before we submit the form, I'm actually going to make sure it is true. Dialog VC.get is visible. I'm going to say, you hid your dialog too soon. Do it after submit. Now it's going to be a little bit tougher to fake. Also, if you're like me, you're really itching to refactor this test. There's lots of dots and lots of things being accessed, and I'm really excited to refactor that. We're not ready yet though. Right now we need to make sure we're only closing the dialog on submit. So how do we do that? Well, again, coming back to this idea of like, let's write this thing the way we wished it worked, and then let's go implement it. So the way I would want this to work is to my feedback card. I actually want to pass an on submit, and I want that to hide the dialog. So I'm going to remove this, which is going to pass the first assertion, but fail the second one again, which is you did not hide the form after submit. So if we go to feedback card VC and I go to constructor, here are the view controller options. Let's add to this on submit, and let's let that take a on submit like that. And then let's go, you know what? Before even doing this, I'm going to extract this out to an interface. I'm going to say feedback card options. Let's move this down. And let's call this on submit. Let's extract that and go on feedback submit handler. I like to call the things that are passed to the on the handlers. I like to end them in the word handler. So in context or out of this context, when I'm using them, I know what they are. So let's go const on submit option. So destructure on submit. Let's go this dot on submit equals on submit. Sweet. So if I hover over this, that's our feedback submit handler. Should we make this? Let's make it optional. So if I make it required, then I got to go and add it to places that maybe I don't want it. So let's make it optional. Private. Okay. And then let's go handle submit. Let's do this. Wait, stat on submit, and we'll optionally emit it right there. And that passed. So, problem still, we're calling it way too early. We do not want to call it unless the submission succeeded, right? That's just making me think that maybe let's make this required, because watch out what this is going to do. So let's make this required and this required. And let's make this required and hit save. Now watch what happens. Oof. OnSubmit's not a function. Kill this here. But you can see we've got a type error. So if I hit Command K, P, now I'm in my feedback card tests and it's telling me essentially I'm missing the OnSubmit. So let's do this. Let's go OnSubmit. And let's just do this. This dot was OnSubmit invoked. Let's go true. And then in the before you should go this dot was OnSubmit invoked. False. Oops. And then I'm going to hit Command period on this to declare that property. I'll say private. So now that we're in here, now we can write the tests to make sure OnSubmit is only invoked on success. Like it actually goes. So like this, watch this. Submit feedback throwing renders alert. And we'll just go right here, watch. Assert dot is false. This dot was OnSubmit invoked. The submit handler should not have been called because there was an error. Bam. It's going to be tough to fake this one now. So we go to feedback card. I'll take the OnSubmit and I'll just put it right here. This is the only place we can put it that will allow all the tests to pass. So now we've got it. So the OnSubmit fires if the submit succeeds. And if we go to our root skill view, we've got it checking that the dialog is not visible on submit. Okay, I think it's time that we do some cleanup, as this test specifically is very ugly looking. And so let's talk through ways that we can clean this up, and then let's do it. Okay, here's what I'm thinking as far as cleaning some of this up. So we've got our SPI feedback card. And what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to go ahead and click there, Command period, and go convert to default export. Just sticking with having any file export one important thing, and then anything else as a named export being a types being named exports. So let's look at what's the same between these tests to see if we can somehow enhance our SPI to cut down on how deep we're having to access things in our tests. So it looks like both tests we have a submit, and in both tests we have a set value against feedback. So let's do this. Let's go to our SPI feedback card and let's go public async. And looks like they're both random. So let's go with this. Fill out feedback, generate ID. Whoops. Feedback. Let's go await this dot form vc dot set value feedback. Let's call it feedback and return feedback. Okay. So look at this. Oh, let me come here. Go ahead and go import. So look at this. Here, instead of all this, I can go set or fill out feedback. And right, we're just making sure the tests don't fail. That's a lot cleaner, right? So let's go into our feedback test. And in here we have fill out feedback, right? But now all we have to do is this, return this form vc dot fill out. No. This dot vc dot fill out feedback. Yeah. That's great. Okay. I'm going to see I've got 4 problems. So I hit Command KP. Yeah, Command KP for the next problem. Looks like generate ID is no longer needed in these tests. That's really nice. I love cutting down on the number of imports I need. Every import is a potential chain you have to follow for a refactor. Okay, I think the next thing is the submit. Both of these things submit a feedback form. So let's just go into our SPY feedback card. I keep saying feedback forms, feedback card, the form's in it. Let's go public, async, submit, and let's go await interactor, dot submit form, this dot form VC. Now let's go to our feedback test. Instead of this, let's go await this dot VC dot submit. Cool. Let's go to our root skill view test. Let's go down. And instead of this, we're going to go await feedback form dot submit. There. That is a lot nicer, isn't it? No, it does look like we have an import error. Yep, we have an unused variable. That is great. Cleaning it up. So now if we go down in here, we switch these to access the functions we've implemented in our test double. What's cool about that, the way that we extracted these by changing this, we didn't have to go change anything else in the test. In one spot, we updated this test for each one, for the submit, one for the fill out feedback, and we didn't have to go into any place else and look through how to find or what else to update. And then in here, same kind of thing. We had called it in 2 places, but we went and updated those. So this is just much cleaner. Okay, so I think there's one more cleanup here, which is this event faker. So here's what we're going to do. Because let's say we change this event name, it's kind of a hassle to go around and update this event faker wherever we have it. So we're going to actually create an event faker local to our skill, and we're just going to reuse that. But in order to make that accessible everywhere, we're going to create an abstract 8-bit test. Well, anyway, this is going to make faking events a lot faster throughout our test. So let's start on that. Think of this stage as the shared functionality across all tests section. And it's going to be 2 stages. Is first, we're going to create our own event faker to minimize the amount of these string literals we have in our test. So if an event name changes, we don't have to go do too big of a search and replace. And then we're going to consolidate some of that functionality into an abstract test that all of our other tests will extend. And that's going to make it a lot easier to roll out changes and manage variations in the game plan. So we want to be flexible, and we don't want one change in a behavior to have a cascading impact on our tests unless that change can be centralized higher level, and then a fix can also cascade through our tests. So again, there will be times where one thing changes drastically enough that it breaks a bunch of tests, but if we've done our job right, we'll only have to make a change in 1, maybe 2 places, and that fix will then cascade down through the tests. So stage 1 is let's create our own event faker to minimize the amount of string literals we have in our tests to guard us against event renames. So to do that, first thing I'm going to start with is creating the event faker down here at the bottom of the feedback tests, and say public async fake submit feedback. I'm going to scroll up. I'm going to take this piece that we have up here and drop it in here. But instead of setting things there like we did, I'm going to pass that callback. For now, I'm just going to do that. And then here, I'm going to call the callback. It's going to be optional. Okay. Why is that? Oh, because it's not. You know what? I'm not going to do a promise. We just void is fine. Okay, the next step is I'm going to go here And I'm going to delete this. And I'm just going to make sure that the target and payload is passed through everything. So let's go target and payload. Then also I want typing, get kind of used to it. It's kind of nice. So where we're declaring our our method here in this callback parameter, I'm going to type this as spruce schemas. So just kind of tapping back into the schemas area. If you go to concepts schemas, all schemas are going to be generated into a schemas.type. So if I hit Command P and I go schemas.types, here's a .spruce schemas. I mean, this is all the schemas and the types from all of our dependencies. So you see Heartwood is in here. If we depended on another skill, so if we ran control space and went add .dependency, we could go and we could add another skills dependency, and then all its schemas would show up for us in here, and they're all nicely namespaced to avoid collision. So we go through schemas dot 8-bit stories dot the version dot submit feedback target and payload. Now, because that's really long, I do like the idea of shortening it. So I select it, Control Shift R, type alias, submit feedback target and payload. And I'm going to move it below that there. Okay, now we have an event faker that has this string literal defined in it for us and passes target and payload for us. So let's go to the before each. Let's do this. This dot event faker equals new event faker. I go command period, declare that. It's this. So now we have our own event faker. And so watch this. Let's go this dot event faker. And I'm going to go all the way to here. And I'm going to go fake submit feedback. And then get rid of that. Oh, we have to drop another one in here somewhere, right? This. There. So let's let that finish. Perfect. So now we've eliminated that string literal. I'm going to leave it in the make event throw because I usually don't wrap the throws in our event faker. You might decide to do otherwise. It's totally up to you. But now what I'm going to do is I want to use this event faker in this test too. Here. I mean, literally, we're not doing anything but listening to the event so it doesn't throw an error down here when we're submitting it. Because again, if I go here, I delete that. You got to either handle it locally or create a listener for our skill. But we don't want to do that yet. We're not doing listeners coming up. For now, I just want to use our own event faker to fake the listening to listener to this, but not have to define the response and the event and all that. So also what I don't want to do is inside of here, let's go to our feedback test. I don't want to have to, in the before each of every test, construct a new event faker. I just want that available in all my tests because we're going to be faking events all over the place. So here's how we do that. Inside of tests, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it support. Inside of support, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it abstract 8-bit test.ts. I like to call it abstract and then whatever the name of the skill is. I'm not going to type out 8-bit stories. I just don't feel like it. You can name it that if you want, or if you don't like it being inconsistent, you can spell it all out. And then you don't do dot tests because that's what the test runner is going to hit. You just put tests in the name. So I'm going to go export default abstract class abstract 8-bit test extends abstract spruce fixture test. So you might have been aware that we're defining these as abstract, but it almost doesn't matter because we're not instantiating the test. We're running them in their abstract state or static state. And so the abstract actually doesn't provide any functional benefit. It just informs us that these tests are not going to be run directly. And so let me jump into here and let's go abstract 8-bit test. Let's got that. Then let's go to our event faker, which is at the bottom of this. And let's go Control Shift R and move to new file. Of course. So I'll just have to manually create it. I don't know why that happens. Sometimes VS Code cannot extract two files. Let's go event faker.ts. Go export default event faker. Let's click here and let's add our import. Let's click on this. Let's add or update our import. So now, right, Command KP. We're not using that. So here it's saying that event faker is not defined, but it's here also. So I'm going to cut that, and let's paste that, and let's go protected static async before each. Await super dot before each. Whoops. Let's go to this dot event faker equals new event faker. And now we want to make this protected so we don't get the warning about it being unused. So then let's cut back here. And we're good. There should be no import of the event faker. It's just now available. So let's go to our root skill view test. Let's extend our abstract 8-bit test. And then instead of doing this, let's go this dot event faker dot fake submit feedback. And that is so much cleaner, isn't it? I'm seeing some warnings. So let's go Command KP. Looks like that's no longer needed. All right, now let's review that. We've got our abstract 8-bit test. This is the only thing here that's universally used is the event faker, but as more and more things become useful across many tests, we'll just drop them in here. We could also have, like, let's say we got a bunch of feedback tests. We could have done an abstract feedback test and put the useful things that all the feedback test needs in there. None of the stuff that we're working on is going to be that complicated, so we don't need to worry about that. And I think that's it. I think now our tests are clean. We have kept them pretty dry. We're very effectively using our test doubles. And we've got our directories structured around the behaviors and not around the tools. And I think it's time to do our listener to actually send the message. So let's create our test that forces us to write our listener. Going to come up with a really original name for this one. Let's call it our behavioral test submit feedback listener. And it's going to go into the feedback folder. And this time we're going to extend our abstract 8-bit test. Did you see? I missed the casing on that test. Let's go fix that. So I'm going to jump to the test reporter. I'm going to go abstract 8 test. Do you see I forgot to case that? So I'm going to do function F2. Let's call it 8-bit. There. Fixed. So let's write the first test that requires us to write the listener. So let's call the test skill is listening. Let's go await this dot event faker dot emit. No. This dot faked client emit and flatten responses. We're going to jump to the 8-bit stores that submit feedback. Yeah, I'm just not gonna, let's just see what happens. Yeah, again, if you find yourself not quite sure what the next step is or where to go, just like write as much as you can and save. And the tests failing, the assertions will tell you what to do next. I mean, generally speaking. So look at this. Submit feedback must be handled locally. You have 2 options. Make sure you have a created listener using Spruce Create Listener and have booted your skill using a wait this step boot skill, or use the event faker to set up a listener in your test. Well, finally, we're doing the first one. We're going to create a listener and boot the skill. So let's go here. Let's go create.listener. And let's go to 8-bit stories. And we have one event, submit feedback. Set enter. Yeah, cool. Let's go back to our test reporter and let's boot the skill. This dot boot skill. All right, what do you think is going to happen? I think I know. I think it's still going to fail. Submit feedback, emit, target, and payload has one error. Payload is required. I knew that. That's what I thought it was going to be. I just didn't want to say it. Let's just jump ahead here because we know feedback is going to be required. And let's just generate feedback. Listener not implemented. So if you look at the call stack here, it's in listeners 8-bit story submit feedback.v blah blah listener dot. So let's do this. Feed.listener. Submit feedback.listener. Listener not implemented. Well, I don't want to do that. Close that. Jeez. The response payload to submit feedback is invalid. Submit feedback response payload has one error. Success is required. Fine. Success equals false. Take that. And then I don't need that. All right, cool. We passed. So let's jump back to the feedback listener. Let's at least make sure success is true. Now, technically, success will always be true because if it fails, it'll throw an error. Well, technically, what it'll do is it will respond with an error in the responses, and emit and flatten will throw, and we handle it with our alert. So we can actually just hard code the response here because the error response has a different structure altogether. So let's do this. Const was success. And let's go assert is true. Success. Submit feedback listener should return success true. Submit feedback should return success true. False. That's perfect. Let's go to our listener and let's go success is true. Okay, what's next? Well, now we want to make sure that when we submit the feedback, we actually emit an event called send message. We want to send a message. To whom? Well, to us. We'll figure out a way to solve that when we get there. We're not going to think ahead. You only do yourself a disservice by thinking too far ahead. As long as we can write the tests around the behaviors we want, we'll be able to refactor to implement it more intelligently after we built it. Because after all, the best time to design something is after you've built it, which is unfortunate. Okay, let's do this. Feedback or emits send message event. Let's go await this dot event faker dot fake send message. As you can tell, I'm doing that thing where I just write it the way I wish it worked. So at least we can fix this. Let was hit equals false. Okay, fake send message, not a function. So let's click on it. And period. Go to clear method. Public async. Let's go all back here and let's say await event faker dot on send message. Return message. This is going to be, there's some stuff here. ID equals generate ID. Body equals generate ID. So I'm just trying to do is find the things that are required. Classification equals transactional. I think that, and target. I think target's just empty. Is there anything else that we need in here? Source. There. Right? Type messages are incompatible. Date created is missing. Okay. Date created. Date now. Doesn't matter. Okay. I think we're good for now. Let's make sure that callback is called. And then we'll let the errors guide us. I'm bored of fixing the types there. Let's just do that later. When the tests fail, it'll tell us exactly what to do. Okay, now we need to emit this event and make sure this event was emitted. So we got to boot the skill again. I don't want to do that again. I want to do that for every test. So let's go Get static async for each. Await super adaptive for each. Let's move the boot skill up there. Then let's do this. Emit, submit feedback. I actually do not want to have to destructure this. I really just don't care for the way that works. Let's do this. Let's move this down. Let's just do this. Assert that is true. Was hit. You did not emit send message in your listener. I am a robot. Well, it's true. We didn't. So let's go submit.listener. Okay, now we're an event listener. This is very intentionally kept thin. You can think of this as almost like in an MVC pattern. This is like your controller, kind of. The reason why we don't actually use a controller in this context is like to handle all of your routes is because those things just grow out of control and they just become these big 1,000, 2,000 line things that are a beast to manage. So instead, what we use is some dependency injection to handle how we or to hold our functionality, and then we invoke the things that we need in our listener. So in this case, we just need to emit this event, the send message event. In order to do that, we need a client, a Mercury client. So let's destructure that out of the event. So we go const client equals event. Now you can hit dot on this to see all the things we got. We got an authenticator for checking and knowing if we're logged in. We've got an authorizer for checking permissions. We've got a client. We've got a connect to API as skill. This is very important. I'll talk about this in a sec. We have a logger, we have our payload, we have our skill, and our source. The source is then who emitted the event. Okay, so let's go await, client, emit, and flatten response, send message. And what do we have in here? We have a target, we have a payload, and in the payload we have a message. And in the message we have what? Body, classification. I think that's it. Is that it? So you see, I'm really, again, as usual, not trying to do this well, just trying to get it done. All right, you see that skill is listening. So let's jump to this test. So this previous test failed because we're not listening. So let's just, you know what? Instead of also using our event faker to listen in here, let's do something different. Let's do this. Let's change this to a property on the test. Let's go declare, let's say private, and then let's move all of this up to here. Yeah, like that. Now it's in each test and we passed. Okay. Let's make sure it passes the expected target first. And the target should be the person who emits the event, because that's, no. The target would be us, the developer. So let's start there. I'm going to go into all these and go target and payload. So also you'll notice, even though there's a type error here, it did pass. So what I think is happening is this transactional string is being widened. So instead of it equaling, so if I hover over this, you can see it can be auth, transactional, promotional, or incoming. In this case, it's transactional. It doesn't matter because I'm not ever really listening to the response. But the problem is this string literal is being widened to type string instead of the actual string literal transactional. So in other words, I have to cast that as a constant because it's one of these, and that is going to get the types to pass. So now let's type the target and let's type the target payload. So schemas, Mercury here, send message, target payload. Send message, target payload. Actually, no. Yeah. Okay, I do want to export this. Okay, so now we have our fake send message all ready to go with the target and payload. Let's do this. Let's destructure target out of here, and let's go this dot send message target equals target. And then let's command period on that and declare it. So it says type any. Lies. Let's make it optional, and let's go did or send message target and payload. But let's pull the target out of it, and then each test, just to be safe, I want to delete this because I want to reset every test. So now, what is the target going to be? Well, let's look at what we have available on the target. So if I go send message target, we got a location ID, so that's not useful. We have a person ID, so we can, but I'd have to know my person ID because we're sending it to us. There's an organization ID, a skill ID, a role ID, or a phone. So how about this? Let's have the feedback sent to our phone, and that'll do a lookup based on phone. But let's not hard code the phone into our test. Let's do it in an env variable. So watch this. So let's do something like this. Process.env.phone, or how about this? Feedback phone 555 555 5555. And then let's go assert.is equal deep this dot message target, and let's go phone, and let's go process.env.feedback phone. Yeah. Cool. So the actual need to what do we do here? This is not right. What is the feedback? There it is. No, we still don't have it. I had two E's. Oh my gosh. That was like a copy and paste fail if I've ever seen one. There it is. So let's go make this pass. So to make this pass, we're not going to just drop in the process env. We're actually going to do the minimum amount of work possible to make the test pass. Sweet. Okay. Now, we need to run this with a different phone number set to this to actually force us to use the env. In order to pull that off really in like a simple way, we're going to parameterize this test. So watch this. Sends message to 555 555 555 555 555 555. Look at this. Phone is a string. So what I'm looking for here when I'm parameterizing this test, so this is the test name. It's the first parameter to decorator. Do you see here we have description, so name description. And then we unroll these args. We can pass as many args as we want, and those arguments are passed to the test. So look at this. So what I'm looking for on this first round of parameterization is I'm looking to not break the test. But now watch. Test sends message to 555 000 000 555 000 000. That one's going to fail, right? Because we hard coded the fives. Bam. Now we have no choice to make this work. Okay, that was it. Now let's check the rest of the payload of this. So we go public static async emits message with expected payload. So let's go wait this dot emit feedback, but we're not tracking the payload. So let's do this. This dot send message. Whoops. Send message payload. Payload. Oh, we got to destructure it from there. Now, actually, let's do this. Payload. Payload. Let's make sure we delete it. A little space there. Okay. Assert.is equal deep to we want to do it like this? Let's find out. This dot payload, dot message. Okay, let's do this. So the first thing I want to do, okay, well, let's talk about this for a sec. Do we want to test the body of the message? Kind of don't think we do. It's kind of like the presentation, the body changing this message and like the words that it says. Should that fail a test? I don't think so. So let's take a different approach on this. Let's do this. Let's go const message equals this dot send message payload. And then let's do assert is equal, and let's just take this one at a time. Message dot classification. I think the transactional is probably fair, right? So let's just start there. Auth does not equal transactional. So let's go submit.listener. Let's go see how I deleted that quote and then brought it back. That's going to give me the IntelliSense. Cool. Okay, so message bodies actually use handlebars to render, and they pull their context from the context of the message. So in other words, if I go, let's say this, const body equals hello first name, handlebars, and then the context would be first name is Tay. If I set the body of the message to hello first name and I set the context of the message, it's going to drop in those placeholders. And if you want, there's a whole section on messaging in the docs. So you can go to the concepts and then messaging. For this case, though, there's a few things I know I want in the context of this message. I want who the message is from, and I want their feedback. So it's like this. Assert.is equal deep message dot context, and we'll say from name equals this dot fake person. This is the person who, in like, see how we're emitting, we're doing fake client, emit and flatten. Who are we when we're doing these emits? We're not anonymous. We can log out. But if you go up here, you can see we have our fake login. This is actually logging us in as a fake person. There's a joke in there. I just can't find it. So fake person dot casual name. So in this platform, you can have a first name or a last name, and those are all optional, but no matter what, you have a casual name. And if you sign up, or if you go to like spruce.bot and you log in, your casual name is defaulted to friend. So all these merge fields still work. So friend name would either be friend from friend, or it'll be first name, last initial, or maybe we'll expose casual name in other ways, let people put in what they want. Also, if you notice, the fake names that are generated for our tests are Star Wars names. So this is from Darth V. We run it again. It's from San H. Run it again. It's from ETH K. Run it again. Okay, you get the point. Gasgano. But that's not all I want. I want the feedback in here also. But how do we get this feedback? I'm randomly generating it here. Let's do it like this. Again, I'm going to write it the way I wished it worked. And then I'm going to go make it work that way. Oops. Let's go to declare. Okay, so the context here. So let's do that. Let's go listeners. Make a listener. Let's go context. So the first thing we got to do is we got to pull out the feedback from the payload. So let's go to payload. Let's go const feedback. Let's destructure that because we're dot. There's only feedback in there. So we hover over this. It's just a string. So let's go feedback. Okay, now how do we get the from name? Well, we can tell who emitted an event from its source, but that's just going to give us the person's ID. So watch this. So source, that's out of here. Go const person ID equals source. And if we hover over this, it's string, null, or undefined. These do have different meanings in this platform. A string is a string. Null means clear out whatever's there, and undefined means ignore it. And this really only matters when we're going to like insert records into a database or persist values in some other way. It's helpful to differentiate between an undefined, again, it's just ignore, versus null, which means like literally clear out what's there. So let's go from name, from name equals person ID. So now we're going to get the person's ID, but we're not going to get their name. We got to get their name. How do we get their name? We're going to have to emit another event to get their name. So there's a core event called get person. And that is what is going to return us the name of this person. So we have person ID. So let's do this. Const person equals await client.emit and flatten response. Get person. Again, if you're not quite sure how to proceed, just save. Fake only supports get person when passing an ID. To fake more, use faker on. We just happen to want to do an ID. So let's go target. What's in here? Person ID. Let's call it person ID. Okay, that did an error, so that's pretty good. Let's go person dot casual name. Heck yes, that is great. Okay, so let's write the body of our message now. But like, let's not get to test it, so we can have some flexibility there. So let's do this. Let's do this. Great feedback alert from name. From name gave you some feedback about 8-bit stories. Feedback. There we go. Again, we could do an assertion against this. I don't think we need to. It's not too bad. It's pretty clean, right? We get the person, then we send a message. Okay, let's do something else here, or let's real quick talk about sending messages and permissions here. So, see how we're sending a message to a phone? This is actually, when we try to do this as someone else, going to throw an alert. And so maybe it makes sense that I show you. Let's go, let me see, I saw boot skill, so let's boot the skill. Okay. So I'm going to do is I'm going to log out, but if I log out, it's going to redirect me to a dashboard. So let's go refresh. Oops, let's go Command N to get a new theater window. Let me go log out. Okay, so now we're logged out. Now watch. Now let me refresh this. Okay. Let's use a phone number that is not ours, so we can experience this as a non-admin user. Because we're an admin, when we set up the theater, you entered your phone number. Now, Mercury has this concept of a demo number. And in your theater, in your development theater, every phone number is set up as a demo number. So if you were to look into the ENV of Mercury, you'd see the demo number, it's demo_numbers, all caps, is just set to star. So all numbers are demo numbers. And what that means is that to log in, you log in with any 4-number pin, doesn't matter. So we're going to choose a new phone number. We'll say 555-0000000, enter, and let's give it a 0000. Now we're logged in. So let's go submit feedback. Let's say, hey there, and then go. Well, shoot, you do not have access to see this person's private details. So we can't pull even our own profile, if we wanted to get our own information, there's actually an event called Who Am I that we would emit. In this case, though, get person is not available. So like it turns out, even if we got past this though, we would not be able to send a message. But if we logged in as the admin user, we'd have gotten past both these things. So how do we make it so that way a person can do this? Well, I think in order to do that, we first should talk about why was this blocked? If the listener is in the skill, you see right here, you don't have access to see this person party's detail. Why was this blocked? So let me show you something. Let's set a breakpoint right here because I'm booting the skill. Let's go back. Let's go to submit feedback. Gibberish, go. Okay, so look at this. We are now in our listener and we can hover over the event and see everything that's in the event. We can see it's in the payload. We can see it's the source. Look at this. So here's what's happening. In order to avoid accidentally exposing data or privileged information or locked functionality in your skill, in your listener, when you destructure the client out of the event, the client that you are getting has a proxy token on it, which means that when you are emitting this event here, you are actually emitting it not as the skill, but as the client on the front end. So this means that whatever permissions that person has are the same permissions you have in here. You will not be able to do something in your listener that the person on the front end cannot do. So you can't accidentally expose functionality here. You are effectively proxying this event on behalf of the person who's logged in and inherit, and then thus you get all their permissions. Now Mercury knows that you're proxying. It uses that proxy token, and those proxy tokens are, what's the term? Ephemeral. They'll just go away when the person logs out or when Mercury reboots. They're not persisted in any way, and so you cannot take that token and just hold on to it. It's not useful for very long. But now that you are essentially making requests on behalf of that person, you cannot do something they cannot do. So the question is, how do you actually do something in your listener that a person cannot do? And the answer to that is you have to emit these events as the skill, not as the logged in person. So let's talk about how to do that. So I just stop that. Let's go back here. Let's see. Again, I didn't get a response after 30 seconds. Fine. So we need to make sure both get person and send messages are not emitted using the proxied client, the one that's proxying events for the person who's logged in. We need it to emit events as the skill, and the skill will have more elevated permissions because we as the admins created the skill. So because we're an admin and we created a skill, it will inherit a lot of our permissions. Now this only happens in the development environment or in environments that you set up, you can configure that way. If you were to try to register this skill using set remote and setting it to production, you would not get the elevated permissions. You'd have to essentially email me and ask me to assign or to give your skill elevated permissions. But for now, we're not worried about any of that. What we're looking to do is to ensure that this event doesn't emit as this client, which is the proxied one. We want it to emit as the skills client. And so here's how we do that. So the first thing we're going to do is start our test. Protected static async emits get person as skill. So we'll go, let's do this. Await this dot event faker dot fake get person. Well, that doesn't exist yet. So let's go into here. Let's go to async. Let's go ahead and define this in our typical way. Wait event faker dot on get person turn person. Okay, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get the faker. So I'm gonna go fake dot get person. So this fake is the same one that's being called here, fake, and then dot login is a decorator. So this is what's faking our logged in person and generating their random name and ID. It's also setting a bunch of fake listeners. That's why we're able to send get person, but we didn't have to fake it ourselves. It is doing that faking for us. But once we create this fake.on, this is going to take over that listener. So the event faker.on clears past listeners. So now we are the ones responsible for emitting this. So let's do this. Target payload. And let's go spruced schemas, Mercury, this, get person, target, and payload. Whoa. Get person, target, and payload. Let's go here. Extract it to the alias get person, target, and whoops. And payload. Export that bad boy. And we did it. Is that it? Yeah. All right. So let's go into here. Let's go like this. Let's go source. So let source event source or undefined. Let's call it past source. And then let's go await this dot emit feedback. So what we want to do now is we want to check assert dot is equal deep past source. And this is not the right event source. We want the one from event utils. And there's location we want to make sure we're doing it as the skill ID. How do we get the skill ID? Actually, you know what? This is not liking this for us. Let's go or null. So look at that. It's saying it's the proxy token. We don't want to do that. We want to get the skill that we are. So let's do this. Watch this. So await this dot skills. This is the skills fixture. And then we go log in as current skill. And this is going to return a client and a skill. We just want to get the skill out of it. And then we're going to go skill.id. Okay. So now what do we do? How do we get rid of this proxy token thing? That's where this comes in. Connect to API as skill. So instead of destructuring client that way, I'm going to go const client equals await connect to API as skill. Now we're going to get the client as the skill, not the person. Now here's something interesting. Just given the way that we had to do this, it fixed our issues downstream. So we don't need to, if we were to write the next test to send message, use the correct client, it would just pass. We don't need to test it because it's already covered here. And if we wanted to actually break this, it would be pretty difficult to do. We'd have to destructure the client, give it a new name. And it's just the nature of this listener made it so fixing it in one spot fixed it in every spot after, which if you think about it makes sense. So I'm gonna hit Command U to boot the skill. Okay, go back here and hit go. Missing one parameter, person ID. Okay. So if we go over here, we're saying missing one parameter, person ID. Why did that happen? Well, that happened because this person ID, not this person ID, this feedback phone is not set. And so what might make sense, so we don't end up in a situation where like, what's going on? If you think about it, this feedback phone is actually required just to use our skill. So this next test, let's do an assertion on the boot of our skill. And if feedback phone is not set, let's throw an error, crash the skill, and just say like, hey, you need a feedback phone if you're going to even boot this skill. And then, as I'd say, the only thing worse than having an error crash your skill on boot is having an error silently occur and then have a whole section, like feature of your skill just not work silently. So let's do that. And to do that, we're going to set up our first did boot listener. Okay, let's make it so if we try to boot the skill without this set, feedback phone, it will throw and it won't even boot. So let's go create test. I'm going to go behavioral. I'm going to say, let's say something like, what are we testing? Throwing error if missing feedback phone. Oops. Yeah, so I didn't name this after the component or the listener, just the behavior is throwing an error if missing feedback phone. Let's make it do the extend the 8-bit abstract 8-bit test. We don't need to. It could just be the fixture test, but this is just easier, or not easier, it's more consistent. Okay, so let's do this. Delete process.env.feedback phone, and then let's go const error equals await assert does throw async this dot boot skill. Let's do this, and that. Let's see. Yeah, expect an error, but never got one. All right, so let's go here, create.listener. So skill did boot, right? And that passed. All right, let's see what we got going next. Look at that. Of course that failed because our listener, our did boot listener, just has a throwing listener not found. Well, so let's get rid of that. Cool, so that passed. Oh, now this one failed. So we gotta do something correctly here because we need this, we need them all to pass. So let's do this. If not, process.env.feedback phone throw yikes. And I'm gonna underscore this because it's unused. That'll remove that link check. Okay, we're almost there. We're still getting this one to fail a bunch. Why? Well, because if we go up here, we're booting the skill before we set the phone. 555-000-0000. All right. So that error is not very helpful. There's a very specific type of error that we would throw in this situation. That's just part of our convention. So let's do an error assertion. Let's go error assert error, and let's give it a code of missing parameters. And then its parameters is env.feedback phone. There we go. This is going to fail because yikes is not even close to right. You did not receive a spruce error, got yikes. So let's go to did boot. We're going to go throw new schema error. So schema errors, if we go into the code here, give us a lot of helpful things around data validation that we're just going to use all over the place. So schema error is what I imported. And the code was what? Missing parameters. And then the parameters were env.feedback phone. Cool. So just to be safe, and I think that's clear enough so you were to see this error. So for instance, let's go command U to boot. Let's see. There it was. Look, missing one parameter, env.feedbackPhone. Is that clear? Let's make it more clear. Let's give it a friendly message. Let's say, you have to set feedback phone in your skills.env to boot. So that's still going to pass the test because the test is just checking the code and the proper metadata, which would be the parameters. But now let's hit Command U. You have to set feedback phone in your skills env. So let's do that. Command Shift E. Let's go over to our env. So here's our skills name, our host, our skill ID and API key. Let's add phone. 555 123 4 5 6 7. Now let's hit Command U to boot. This little delay that you're seeing is actually because it is building your skill views. And that just takes a sec. Go. Go. That was it. It's submitted. No errors. Now we're not going to get the message because I put in a bad phone number, and then also we're in the local dev environment, so no SMS adapter is configured. You can check the documentation if you want to use Twilio or Vonage or the two SMS adapters we support. But you know what I didn't really care for? Waka? Like some sort of confirmation, right? So check this out. Let's go to feedback card. Let's get our tests back up. Handle submit. So watch this. If I go here, let's go right before this. Await this dot alert. Let's do message. Thank you so much. Let's make the title feedback submitted. And let's do, what is it? Is it style? Style, error, info, or success. Now check this out. Success alerts are ignored in the tests. Oh, you know, it just looks, okay, so let's just do this for now. That out. I don't get that to pass. Not quite sure. I'm clearly deleting it here, but what it's almost like is that it that delete doesn't actually delete it. So let's try this. Maybe if we set it to an empty string, that will return falsy. So convince that worked. Okay, so you can't. That's so strange. That's a new behavior. You cannot delete the env, but we can set it to an empty string, which resolves to falsy in the boot. Okay, anyway. Also, you noticed that success did not break the test. So if we were to remove this and just do the default style of an alert is error, this is going to fail a few tests, it looks like. So let's just bring that back. Okay, so let's reboot the skill, which at this point I could just use watch views. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do that. Close this, hit control space, and do watch.views. Let that run. Again, watch views only watches views, so if we make any changes to listeners or anything, that is not going to be, the skill will not be reloaded. All right, watching for skill changes, go back here. Let's now, because we did change the view behavior, we do have to refresh. Again, anytime we're changing listeners or anything that's happening in the back end of the skill, you don't have to refresh anything. Let's go to feedback. Hey there. Let's go. Yes. So let's do one more thing. I think that little delay, see how it's pretty fast. That's it. Gets the person, sends the message. So it is pretty fast. That being said, there is that little delay there. Let's do this. Let's add a busy indicator. Watch. So let's go right here. Let's go this.cardbc.set is busy true. And then after everything is said and done, let's set it to not busy. Now, again, this is presentation, so I'm not testing it. If you're in a more complicated situation where there's lots of paths or lots of possibilities, you might want to assert if a card is busy or not. I've had it sometimes where I've totally botched it and left a busy on and been like, all right, fine, I'll test it. Watch this. This dot card bc dot set is busy. False. Again, not really going to impact any of our tests. Let's go back here. Let's refresh. Go feedback. Hey there. And go. Look at that. That's cool, right? Let's do it again. Hey there again. Go. It's just for a split second, but I still think it adds to that whole experience. Okay, that's it. Let's go to these wireframes. We've got our feedback. We've got it rendering a form. We've registered an event. We defined the event. We emitted it. We listened. We sent a message. We sent a message both as the logged in person and then got permission denied when we logged in as a non-admin. And then we switched it to using the skills client. We did an alert on failure. We did some busies. We did some successes. This was pretty solid. I think you're going to find going forward, a lot of this stuff is somewhat the same and a little bit repetitive. So you should get pretty fast at it and just have a lot of fun in the nuance between the tasks. Next time, we're going to do a family form. So we're just going to do another form. And this time, the only difference is we're going to persist the data and then pull it back out and populate the form. All right. See you all on chapter 3.